find yourself. You swerve, but you've not made the decision to swerve. You just did it. That's that part of the brain in action. Its job is to take care of us if a lion's in our living room. Then we have what they call the mammalian part of the brain. And that's kind of in the middle, we share with all the mammals. And that's where the emotion centers are, kind of in the middle. And then over top of that, we have the neocortex. And that's the newest part of our brain. It's bigger, our human brain isn't the biggest brain on the planet. Elephant brains are huge. But we have more folds. You ever seen a Hollywood jar, brain in a jar? All those wrinkles and folds make more space for neurons. And that's where all the good stuff is. So right here in this room, most likely, most of us have this part of the brain online. If we took a picture of the MRI, of the brain through an MRI or something, we'd see this part of the brain lit up. That's our social center. It's higher reasoning, empathy, intuition, higher problem solving. All the good stuff is in the neocortex. So when somebody's had a shock or through either car accidents that we're talking about today, I kind of want to generalize a little bit to trauma, period. When we've had a shock, what happens is the neocortex kind of goes offline, or it can go offline. Not for everybody, but if it does, as Dr. Tonte was saying, it affects a lot of the other systems that we have. Let's go back down to this part here. I grew up in BC, and BC is bear country. I grew up in the interior of BC, and I used to ride horses on all these old logging roads. And we can tell ourselves, train ourselves, this is what you do in this situation. So in bear country, there are certain things you do and don't do, especially when you're on a horse. So I knew exactly what to do if I saw a bear. So one day my family is fishing along the creek, and we're all spread out about a kilometer down the creek. And there's a big rock across the creek, and there's all of a sudden this huge head rears up. And it was a grizzly. His head was huge. And even though I knew, don't run from a bear, I was half a mile down the road before my neocortex kicked back online again. So even with all the training that I'd had, and spent years and years on horseback, my body and brain just took off. So part of the reason why I want to explain that is a lot of people, when they do have a trauma and then their brain starts acting differently, they feel like they're losing control. In some ways they are, because this part's often firing. Sometimes this one, sometimes this one. And they can't stop it. One of the questions I ask clients is if they've had some kind of trauma, they're coming in for whatever reason, they can't even define what they're necessarily coming in for. That happens a lot. I'll say, how do you sleep? Because not very many people who have had a trauma and are in it sleep very well, because the brain is in overprotection mode, right? I've got to make sure this body survives, so I've got to be vigilant all the time to protect us. So we don't have a lot of control over that. And then I'll ask a bunch of other questions around. I want to feel for whether they have an adjustment disorder from an accident, or do they have full-on PTSD. Let me check that second. Oh yes. Has anybody heard of the window of tolerance when it comes to trauma? No? Okay. Again, very popular online if you want to Google window of tolerance. So imagine my hand is kind of a window that can open or close. And everybody in this room, when they're functioning normally, our window is like this. But if we've had an accident or a trauma, the window kind of starts to close a little bit. If we have a lot of stress in our life, on top of that trauma, it closes a little bit. If there's other things that have happened in our past that's not resolved, the window can be closed a little bit. If it closes too much, and what this means is we can't tolerate regular everyday things anymore. You're talking about physical things that we can't tolerate, but what about the other things? Kids are yelling, I can't handle my kids anymore. Why can't I handle them screaming anymore? I used to be just fine, now I can't handle it. I'm angry all the time. Why am I so angry all the time? Why can't I sleep? Why am I having nightmares? Why am I anxious for no reason whatsoever? I'm in a room, nice people, and I just can't help feeling like the shoe's going to drop somewhere, right? So when we experience big things, our normal, healthy window of tolerance begins to close. And if it closes too much, we're going to go into either hyperarousal or hypoarousal. So hyperarousal are the safety things where we feel anxious, angry, out of control. We can feel this sense of wanting to run away, and our reactions just take over. That's hyperarousal, right? That's down here in this part of the brain. If it can go the other way as well. I've met lots of clients like this who used to be able to have great capacity to handle lots of things throughout their life, and all of a sudden they can't get out of bed. They're exhausted all the time. And it's as though their brain and body, instead of running, wants to collapse. All they can do is sleep or not feel like they can't move. I had a client a few years ago whose husband said he wanted a divorce. She was shocked. They were kind of trying to work their way through it, and then all of a sudden she phoned him up one day and she said, you gotta come get the kids, I can't get out of bed. And she spent 2 days in there's a theory for this that's explained in neuroscience called polyvagal theory, where we have dorsal shutdown. And it's the brain's way of saying, okay, you've had enough, reset, we're shutting down for a while. You're not moving. And it's for healing, and that's the purpose of that part of the brain. So we see that all of that in the therapy office. The part that I really want to get across to people is understanding that this is not a voluntary process. We can't just will it away. Like if I slice my arm open, I can't just say, okay, let's go away, heal, and it's going to be gone. And yet people think that's what we're supposed to do around psychology. If something, like the brain is the most complex organ in our entire body, it runs everything. And yet, there's a stigma about wanting to get help. It's getting better, but it's still not there. Thank goodness it's getting better. What else do you want to say? Yes. So not everybody who, even if you look at combat veterans, only about 20% of veterans who see hard, horrible combat end up with PTSD. 80% don't. And so there's a lot of research and why is that? What's happening? And so sometimes what some of the research is showing is that trauma and stress can compound. So if we have had other stressors in our life and then something like combat comes along, then it's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back, and then we end up in full-blown PTSD. But most people, with time's a healer of many things. If our information processing system's working well, we're all born with one, we heal relatively well. But if we've had a pancaking effect of a lot of traumas, i.e. the window's been closing, then there's nothing we can do about it without help. We need help. So I'd like to remove the stigma, go get the help. It's getting better at this. So if somebody has,
What type of help? Psychological help? Or something from a GP? The reason is because, as I understand it, a lot of the symptoms you were talking about, doctors would say is depression. And they would say, here's an SSRI, try these, and see how it goes.
It doesn't even go very well. Because the issue itself, if you look at there's something called the PCL5. It's a symptom checklist to screen for PTSD.
Yeah.
Depression is one of the symptoms. It's a symptom it's not PTSD itself, and I know there's lots of accidents people get in that don't lead to PTSD but can still be traumatic. If we do end up with PTSD, it's not a mental health issue. It's a nervous system issue. And so it needs to be the trauma itself. People come to me. I want to help them process what happened. We have an information processing system in the brain. It can handle a lot of stress. It wouldn't be the dominating species. Well, some people would say we're not really, but we wouldn't be the dominating species on the planet if we couldn't handle a lot of stress and trauma. But there is a limit to what we can handle. It's like the gears get jammed in there, and then everything stops working. It affects every aspect of our life. But we have methods of therapy that can help process the trauma, whether it's old trauma or new, to get those gears going again, get that system back online again, process it, and then all of a sudden, oh, we're sleeping better. We're not feeling, depression starts to lift, the anxiety starts to come down. And then there's also things that go along with that to deal with anxiety, things like breathing, exercise, yoga. There's all kinds of things that we can do for that, but they aren't going to solve it all by themselves. They're like, you have a path. There's a path. Yeah. So if somebody has a trauma from driving, they have an accident, what are some of the common symptoms that you would imagine people have had? Maybe some of you have had accidents and you know.
Constant checking the rearview mirror to see who's going to run into me. Yeah. And I know I have no control of that.
Yeah.
Not because that's happened to me, but I was the person who did that to someone. And it was a tiny little bump, and I said, let's settle this up. And within 2 years, I got this letter that scared the bejesus out of me, and it accused me of like 10 different things. And I was distracted for a moment reading the sign. But I know that it was a shock to her system. So what you had to say today, it was like, oh, that's why I was accused of all those things, because when I accidentally bumped her, no damage, no visible damage to me, you hit me. And I'm terrified of when I'm driving, I'm hypervigilant.
Mm-hmm.
I have ADHD, a generalized anxiety disorder, and I can't always judge the lane I'm turning left into. I think I'm in the right lane, and then I hear honk, and then I know, oh, you're in the wrong lane, honey, so I move over. But it's that my window of tolerance, I think, is a peephole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have history of,
right.
Like childhood.
So complex trauma.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
And we have developmental. They tried to get that in the diagnostic system, but the HMOs didn't like that idea, so they kiboshed it. There's some more recognition now, but it's not official.
Nightmares.
Pardon me?
Nightmares.
Yes. Yeah. That's a big one.
Being a backseat driver.
People who've been in car accidents really struggle with being the passenger.
Yeah.
And it has to do with not having control. Like some people don't even want to drive. There's 4 main areas of symptoms within PTSD. So I'll say what they are, and then you can kind of think about what areas make sense in an accident. So there's changes in arousal and reactivity. So that's the hypervigilance piece, and sleep that falls in there. Intrusion symptoms. Intrusion symptoms can be nightmares. But what else might be intrusion symptoms? Has to do with thoughts and emotions.
Horribleizing thoughts, thinking this is going to happen. I do that waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah.
That's how I live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the what ifs. What if I got hit harder? What if my child was in the car with me? What if it was from the side instead of the back? Those are big intrusive symptoms, right? Intrusive thoughts, yeah. There's also avoidance. So what avoidance is another big trauma symptom. So what might that look like in a car accident?
Like people don't go down that road anymore. They don't go on the highway. They don't like to drive anymore.
Yeah.
Avoid everything they don't go to the restaurant they were just leaving.
Exactly. So there's a concept, I think Dan Siegel talks about this too. What fires together in the brain wires together in the brain. So if two things happen at the same time, that's a good example. There's positive ones and negative ones, right? One would be, we had an accident right outside the restaurant that we went to. Never going to that restaurant again, because now that restaurant is associated with all the negative feelings from the accident. A common one is, I won't take that highway anymore. I have lots of people who won't drive Highway 21 because they've had accidents on Highway 21.
My mom would not turn left, and I was so dismissive and disgusting with her when we won't turn left. It's like it was just one of those things, and I have 10, right? So
That you what?
I have 10. She had that thing because for whatever reason because you have no control over is somebody gonna switch out of that one. It looks like they're all going that way, and then one comes through and bang, right? So
Yeah.
So is there like opposite of avoidance? Like is there something like you're purposely putting yourself through that again to go down that road or go down the road up where the other car came from? Because that's my problem. I drive down that road all the time and I could take a different route, but I don't.
Okay, so chances are what's happening for you is when again, it's not a conscious thing that the brain does, it's an unconscious thing. When we've had a trauma, our brains will focus, hyper-focus, or fixate or ruminate on whatever it was in an effort to resolve it. Same as with, if you have children, okay. So when kids experience something for the first time, and it's either exciting, scary, or whatever it is, they will take their toys and they will reenact it over and over, which is why you need play therapists to evaluate kids with trauma. They'll reenact it over and over and over again, and it's the brain's way of trying to find resolution. There is another factor, though, in the PTSD checklist that we also check for high-risk behavior, because not too many of my clients, they usually answer 0 to it, but some people engage in high-risk behavior after, like speeding, or self-medicating with alcohol, or that kind of thing. But chances are that's what that is. That's your brain trying to say, if we just do it again one more time, we'll figure this out, and then we'll feel in control, and the disruption that you're feeling will go away.
Is that really negative reinforcement?
It can be. Yeah. So if I was working with you, I'd want to work on that specific thing and probably do the trauma processing around what happened where, and titrate it in small pieces so it's manageable and not flooding. Yeah. And then your brain won't need to do that anymore. Yeah.
I mean, especially after the first couple of days, I would almost force myself to replay that the moment of impact and it just would just happen to me. So, but now it's more like, okay, I'm just driving and
It's like a
I'll
habit
just
now.
drive
Yeah.
specifically that one.
Yeah. I want to check your question. I'm not sure what you meant by that.
Well, I don't think it's actually negative reinforcement. As I thought, it's exposing yourself to a stimuli which is scary or adverse to you, and you do that because the continued exposure will make you no longer.
Oh, okay. So
Fear of that.
you're talking exposure therapy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like getting back on the horse that bumped you off, so she keeps getting back on the horse.
Or a fear of spiders. Expose someone to a small spider, big spider.
Okay, so I did have somebody a couple of years ago who couldn't drive in the area and it's on his route. It was really out of his way not to go that way. So we did exposure therapy and titrated it. So first, for example, you gradually make it more closer to the target. So his wife drove the car near the area for the first couple of times. Then he drove with his wife in the car, but around the area, but close to see it.
Yeah.
Then he drove with his wife in the car because he always felt calmer when somebody else was in the car at the site and could stop anytime he wanted. He had to do it on a Sunday when it was quiet. less risk, you know what I mean? So you build it up. That's exposure therapy, but that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about your brain is ruminating to try to find resolution.
And when I do it during like on a week, like daily, like as I drove, it's from on my way from picking up the kids from school.
Right.
I don't react, like it's just a normal part of, but like now I'm getting emotional about it because now that I talk about it, but when it happens, it doesn't, like I don't have any kind of reaction. It's just normal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But talking about it makes me emotional.
Yeah.
Brings it back up to the surface.
Well, and so sometimes that can be about, like some people will ask me, well, how do you know when something's processed? Like when do I know when I'm done with it? And it's usually when they can talk about it, think about it, bring it up, and they don't feel it anymore. Because you were alluding to this before, we have 5 or more senses. And everything that my right hand touches during the day, nose, eyes, I think eyes might go straight back, but basically everything the right side of the body experiences, physical sensations, gets stored in the left side of the brain, and vice versa for the other side. And then when we dream at night, usually during REM sleep, that's when the brain does most of its processing. So the 2 hemispheres share that information through a thick neural network called the corpus callosum. And then when that happens, the brain will trim away the useless bits of information we don't. Can you imagine how many neurons would be used up on every face you ever saw for your entire life if the brain didn't trim some of that stuff away? It's a lot of information. So it trims away a lot, and then it stores in a different part of the brain, usually in the back, information that's been processed. So if someone has a car accident, and a month later, I say a month because a month has to pass for the diagnosis of PTSD. But if a month later, they can still smell the gasoline, or they can hear the crunch of metal, or they feel the hot coffee that lands on their lap, or we go through the 5 senses, then it's not processed. If we think about it, and it takes a little work to recall it, it doesn't come up for us, we don't really feel it when we're thinking about it, then it's processed. That's a simplified version of figuring out something.
I can speak to not accident related, but EMDR got me through a whole
I'm
lot
an
of,
EMDR therapist.
yeah, like that was
Game changer for me
I
as a
had a
therapist.
number 11 incident. I couldn't talk about my parents' marriage without weeping copiously, and now it's one or well, right now I'm getting a little, but I think it's because of remembering that therapist. So so there's hope.
EMDR is a very good treatment for PTSD.
Yeah, it mimics the information system we already have in our own brain to help shift where things are processed. It's a super dumbed down version. I have a little video on my website if you ever want to see that, but there's lots of videos online.
What is your website?
It's just my name. I don't do technology, and I don't do a lot of marketing anymore. Just my name. Google my name.
I
It gets
forget
Kimberly
your
Law
name. I'm
Psychological
sorry, I'm old,
Services.
I have no memory. What is
Kimberly Law. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. You had your hand up there for a second, and someone.
No, I was just thinking about flying. I got to fly somewhere on a long flight, and it scares the heck out of me. And it sort of always has, and I would love to get over it rather than take out of that.
Yeah, I've
But
actually.
won't get me anymore.
I've worked with a few people who have it's a phobia, an irrational fear of flying. Although sometimes it's not irrational, so somebody actually had an accident or nearly died in a plane. But phobias are fears of things, right? Sounds like you might have a bit of a phobia.
And just listening to you now, I think what happened with me the first time I flew, I was probably 17 by myself, and I was flying back from Toronto, and back then it was a DC-3 or something like that, and we had a storm, and the bathroom door of the plane was open, and it was going like that because the plane was doing all this. And I think that I probably never really got over it.
Right.
That's why I'm still scared.
Yeah, and that's a trauma that gets kind of stuck in there. And should you choose to, you could see somebody like me or an EMDR therapist and see if you can work on some of that.
I'm getting a little better. But,
Yeah. Exposure therapy can help. So for flight type exposure, it would be more like look at a plane taking off, watch a video of a plane taking off until your system gets calm again. Then imagine doing it until you're a few times until you get calm again. It's all about getting back to baseline, right? That's what exposure is about. And then build up to, like, make a plan to build up towards actually flying. If you have a long flight, can you take a short one somewhere, for example? You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, well,
And there's other things that you can do too.
and I know it's the safest way to travel. I know that.
Yes, that's what I mean by irrational. A lot of the things that we experience, we know up here, like we know this part of the brain understands, but the trauma isn't locked in that part of the brain. It's locked in here, in the emotional part of the brain. And they don't always talk to each other.
Yeah. And then the stupid part of me, which is there's lots of, when I'm surfing the internet and I see the headline Mayday, I can't not see it. I have to open it and read all about the plane crash,
Right.
which so it's kind of dumb.
Well, that's probably similar to this young lady's experience. It's here.
Kasha.
And terrible eyes and ears and eyes.
Kasha.
That could be something along those lines too.
Yeah.
We recently flew to Amsterdam, and I tried to get all my affairs in order because when I fly, I'm sure that I'm not going to make it home.
Mm-hmm.
That goes with me. It started the first time we ever flew. Our kids were 5 years old, and now they're 40 something, almost 50. And we went to Hawaii and left our kids with their aunties, and that stays with me. So I was amazed and grateful, and thank you God to come home. But then I was depressed for 3 days. I was the couch potato. I had no Zoom. I get up and go, got up and went.
Hypoarousal.
Okay.
Yeah.
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 It sucks. And then COVID, and then
Yeah.
I'm the Karen meme and right? So
Well, society's had a lot to do with in the last while, so that's all. Yeah, closing some windows. Therapy, good help. Like somebody asked me earlier, it came up. You know, who should we talk to? I think a team is required for a trauma. The faster it can be dealt with, it's like it sinks deeper, kind of like into a wound. The earlier we can deal with it, but we can always deal with it. If you have the right people, so I always work with a group of people. I'm always referring to chiropractors. I'm always referring to a little less to physio. Physio's never been huge. It doesn't work for me, but I've been an advocate of chiropractic since I was about 10. And other, even as some people find success with Nuka chiropractic.
with what?
It's a different kind of Nuka. You can explain it better than I do.
Or not?
It's a type of technique they use. They assess and treat the neck to help the whole body. That's kind of the
And that's all they do.
process
They don't
behind
do the whole system. They just focus on that one thing. So I'm looking at multidiscipline factors but you'll be talking about some of the, I need to sit down here too, but when I'm doing trauma therapy with people, I always have to do a disclosure in a way, because if they're in the middle of a legal case, it can affect some of that. They need to know that where they start with, they may not end up with in their legal process. So I have to talk to people about that. Let's see if there's anything I haven't said. Did I get all four? Oh, the 4 areas of PTSD, so changes in arousal and reactivity, intrusion symptoms, avoidance, and negative changes in mood and cognition. What that can be where the depression or anxiety comes in, but also where negative thoughts come in. Not always things like suicidal ideation. That sometimes scares the Jesus out of people when they have those kinds of thoughts when they've never had them before. They're not uncommon in a trauma process. But the negative thoughts, the world isn't safe, I don't feel safe, is this a safe place? I have to
Distrust in
look over
authority.
them. What's that?
Distrust in authority, like our government or FDA, all those. Medical even. That
Well, they could be part of it, but I think there's a lot of other things going on right now too, as well. Yeah. Anyway, any other questions? Or? No? I'm very interested in that.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
That was great. That was actually interesting. I told Kim and Joe I'm actually really excited just to hear what they have to say. So here's Joe Nagy. He's, like I talked about earlier, he's a lawyer down the road, about a stone's throw away from our office actually, and deals with PI and mostly vehicle collision cases, right?